We want to thank Nora Vocal, the director of NIDA, for stimulating the development of this webinar series, really giving people equal access to understanding what research NIDA is conducting related to the prevention and cure of hepatitis C, particularly among people who inject drugs, that you'll be hearing more about from my colleague, Dr. Wilson Compton, who's the deputy director of NIDA, followed by Dr. Raul Mandler, who's the senior physician, clinical medicine branch, division of therapeutics, medical consequences at NIDA. So I'll turn it over to Wilson at this point. Wilson.
Thank you very much, John. It's a pleasure to be here today on behalf of the National Institute on Drug Abuse to be speaking about a topic of great public health importance and one with great opportunities for major progress. And that's really the message that I hope I'll convey both directly and indirectly, is that we have a unique opportunity at this point to address particularly hepatitis C, with the potential for elimination of this, what has been a scourge and a major killer of populations both in the US and internationally. Now, I'm going to frame a little bit of our research here, but remember that mine are just an introductory comments before we get to the main part of the seminar today in a few minutes. As we think about the issues related to hepatitis C, it's important to recognize that it's not all by itself, but hepatitis C is part of a constellation of intersecting epidemics or syndemics. And in particular, we think about how they overlap with HIV infection, with opioid dependence, fundamentally because of the high-risk behavior that occurs when injection equipment is shared among individuals using drugs intravenously or by other forms of injection. Recent estimates have reminded us that this is not a small problem in the US, with some 3.7 million injection drug users in the US in the most recent estimates. And there certainly is a classic example of how this synergy came together in terms of the outbreak in Indiana in 2015, where because of intense injection of oxymorphone prescription opioids, we saw an outbreak of HIV and hepatitis C in a small rural county in southern Indiana. Now, I have some more recent data from one of my colleagues, Dr. Stephanie Strathy and colleagues, that helps illustrate how these crises come together, how these issues come together. So to look at this, I need to step back and look at the trajectory of our US overdose crisis. Certainly for the last 20 years, this has focused on opioids. First, the prescription opioids, like the oxymorphone outbreak that I highlighted for you just a moment ago, heroin following shortly on its heels, and then most recently, for about the last decade, synthetic opioids. That means fentanyl and the high-potency fentanyl compounds that have produced such devastation in communities all across the country. Simultaneous with the emphasis on the synthetic opioids, that is fentanyl, we've seen a marked increase in the incidence of hepatitis C. Well, that's a curious juxtaposition in terms of the timing. For the first time, in a paper that's now in a preprint form at Clinical Infectious Diseases, Dr. Strathy and colleagues, led by Joe Friedman, have shown in their cohort at the Tijuana San Diego border that use of fentanyl is independently associated with HCV seroconversion in both the univariate and multivariate models. So this is an important example of how these two factors may be related to one another as part of this syndemic. And one way that one of my colleagues helped summarize this, and it's a reflection of the language in the paper, is that the short half-life of fentanyl plus the long half-life of hepatitis really leads to a dreadful combination. So this is important new data that I highlight for you coming from a NIDA-funded study primarily designed to address HIV, but clearly addressing the syndemic related to these multiple public health issues. In general, NIDA is one of the largest funders of hepatitis C research at NIH, with about $25 million in research in fiscal year 2023, the most recent full year we have. with areas of research spanning multiple domains. I'm only going to highlight a couple of these just to give you a taste for the kind of research we're supporting. But I thought I'd start out with some very important work coming from the Stanford Prevention Policy Modeling Lab. Doug Owens, Margaret Brando, Josh Solomon at Stanford, but also joined by Dave Peltiel, Greg Gonsalves at Yale, and Jim Kahn at UCSF. This group has helped us really explain how screening for hepatitis C virus is a key first step in addressing this crisis. It's effective and cost-effective, and is now part of the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force recommendations in 2020. I will say that that's when Dr. Owens was the chair of the USPSTF. And so it's wonderful to see that his work has led to major guideline changes by the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force. More recent work is focusing on how interventions that address these syndemics, hepatitis C, opioid use, and HIV simultaneously, might address the overall crisis for us. A second set of studies I want to highlight for you are what we call our Rural Opioid Initiative. This is a partnership between CDC, SAMHSA, and the Appalachian Regional Commission to conduct research studies to address the relationship of opioid use, HIV, and hepatitis C infection. These projects included both observational studies and the beginning of demonstration products or interventions. And they first helped us understand that HCV testing is a key component of addressing this issue, but HCV testing was really not being done on a widespread basis. So there's a real need for expanding access to care. The observational data has already led to changes in terms of reimbursement in multiple states. So those are some of the very practical solutions, in addition to the laboratory at MGH, MIT, and Harvard, the Reagan Institute has been able to develop new technologies for doing phylogenetic linkages across exposures to HCV. I'm very pleased that a follow-up funding opportunity is currently underway. Grants have been submitted and they're under review for this follow-up. So stay tuned for additional research to be conducted in rural populations all across the country, supported by NIDA and our partners. Now, a third area that I want to highlight is our partnership with CDC's HIV behavioral surveillance program, that we were able to supplement this project to allow full testing for HCV in the study conducted in 2018. This paper was just published this year, and it shows overall over 60% of the injection drug users were HCV antibody positive, and over 40% had current HCV infection. Really a remarkable example of the needs for outreach and intervention for these high-risk populations. As you can see from the graphic, it reminds us that the HCV infection occurs early in use of injection drugs. So within a year, almost all of the exposure to HCV had already been documented. Now, the last study I want to highlight is an intervention study. So we take that information about high-risk populations, in this case, a rural population in Kentucky. We couple that with the need to do aggressive outreach for injection drug users. And Jennifer Havens and colleagues have been doing just such a study to test the possibility of eliminating hepatitis C in a population that had a large number of endemic high-risk behaviors and a high rate of hepatitis C. The key issue here is that they've been doing both on-site testing using a rapid testing protocol and the, let me go back one. The expert HCV finger stick and RNA testing on-site. So if in 1 hour they could determine the presence of hepatitis C antigens. And then for those who are positive, they generally started them on the potentially curative treatment, Epclusa, for 12 weeks. What they've been able to show in their study of about 380 persons is that there's a sustained virological response in some 95%. There is reinfection in some, but so far it's a small number. In addition to doing these primary outcomes, this study was able to be used in a very cost-effective way to help the Cepheid company submit data to the Food and Drug Administration that allowed FDA to authorize the expert point-of-care device just now a little over a month ago, or about a month ago. So this is a way that NIDA has been supporting research across a range of areas related to hepatitis C, and we look forward to more high-impact research going forward. Now, I'm really pleased to turn it over now to Dr. Raul Mandler, who will introduce our speakers as we turn to the main events for today, which is Dr. Jackie Linus, who will be speaking to us about expansion of point-of-use acute HIV infection platforms for hepatitis C, and Dr. Andrea Kovacs, who will be talking about long-term effects of injection drug use HIV and HCV and the impact of HCV cure among women. And finally, Dr. Andrea Cox will help lead discussion. But I encourage all of you who are listening to put your questions in the chat so we can have a lively discussion when these important lectures are done. And with that, Dr. Mandler, I turn it over to you.